Well, good morning, and thank you to UN Women Centre of Excellence and the Ministry of National Defence and the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family for inviting me to speak today. And I'd really specifically like to acknowledge and thank UN Women for their tireless support for progressing gender equality within the Republic of Korea defence and security sector. I'd also like to acknowledge the points made by Commander Tyson in his presentation on the importance of gender equality in peace and security efforts and the role of women as active participants in creating peace. And notably, that their inclusion in conflict prevention and response makes military operations and missions more effective and successful. And while Tyson spoke more broadly to the gendered nature of conflict and its impact on women and girls, I want to speak to what the Women, Peace and Security agenda means to uniformed women in the security sector. But first, I just want to share some sentiments surrounding the recent sinking of Her Majesty's New Zealand ship Manu Wanui, and I hope for my New Zealand colleagues in the room that I said that correctly, off the coast of Samoa just recently. And you may have heard that the ship's commanding officer since 2022, Commander Yvonne Gray, was a woman with 30 years of naval experience, and she safely evacuated the ship's company without any injuries or death. And while the circumstances surrounding the sinking of this ship will, of course, be subject to an inquiry in due course, the Court of Public Opinion has already judged Commander Gray. Reports of gender-based attacks on her competence and leadership have emerged. She's been personally trolled on social media, and this has led to abusive comments towards other uniformed women in the streets of New Zealand. Critics accused Gray of being appointed to her role due to her gender rather than her qualifications. And quite rightly, New Zealand's Defence Minister has publicly defended Gray, saying the one thing that we know did not cause the sinking of the ship is the gender of the ship's captain. Now, sadly, these gender-based attacks stem from the very tightly held traditional views of women's roles in society. And comments about her competency and an appointment based on gender rather than merit are an attack on the professionalism and the training standards of the military. And what they're suggesting is that the appointment of a less qualified or less competent officer just because she's a woman. Now, this kind of commentary fuels the view that women cannot do the roles that were once held exclusively by men. It also suggests that standards are lowered for women, and nothing can be further from the truth. I speak from experience as having served as a senior officer on a naval warship that all personnel at sea are trained to the same exacting standards regardless of gender, and that no leniency is given to women just because once upon a time they were unable to serve in combat roles. And there is no doubt that Commander Gray, who served in both the United Kingdom and the New Zealand Navy, has had the same warfare training and experience as her male colleagues, and that she was appointed to her commanding officer's role on merit and on equal terms with her male colleagues. And to suggest otherwise diminishes not only the efforts and progress of gender equality more broadly, but the efforts and progress of advancing women's equal participation in our armed forces. On a brighter note, we can take delight and rejoice in the fact that in New Zealand, both the Chief of Army and the Defence Minister are women, and both earned their right to be appointed to these roles. Both women are in these roles because of their equal access to opportunities, power, and resources. But not all uniformed women are in this position. Globally, armed forces are at various stages in the gender equality journey, with some quite advanced, as with New Zealand, others where women remain relegated to safe and less demanding roles because of traditional gender-based views and attitudes on the abilities of women. What this situation reveals is that gendered power structures and dynamics that compromise progress on gender equality and limit women's participation on an equal footing with men prevails in armed forces and peace operations. So firstly, let me define gendered power structures and dynamics. Well, quite simply, they refer to the systems and hierarchies within our institutions that are organised and maintained based on gender norms and in the ways in which power is distributed and exercised between genders. and gender norms dictate the behaviours and roles that are considered appropriate for individuals based on their perceived gender. These structures and dynamics are influenced by cultural, social, economic and political factors. They shape the roles, behaviours and opportunities available to individuals based on their gender. And they are, of course, historical, based on times when only men worked outside the home and provided for their families. And while time has moved on, these behaviours and attitudes have not. These gendered power structures and dynamics manifest in the military in several ways. First, they prioritise aggressive behaviour, emotional suppression, and physical endurance as the key measure of military capability, which sidelines other vital skills. Second, they reinforce traditional gender roles, assigning women to support or administrative positions while reserving combat and leadership roles for men. And this undervalues women's contributions and excludes them from key missions and decision-making. And compounding this expectation is that women should prioritise family and caregiving responsibilities over their military careers. And this undermines their career ambitions and their financial independence. Third, they foster a hostile work environment that's marked by widespread sexual harassment and discriminatory behaviour towards women and other marginalised groups. Fourth, they undermine women leaders' authority by subjecting them to greater scrutiny and harsher evaluations than men, forcing women to work harder to prove their capability. And finally, they cause resistance to policies and initiatives aimed at integrating women into all aspects of military operations and leadership, with some viewing these efforts as a threat to traditional military values. So constant exposure to these structures and dynamics can undermine women's confidence and self-esteem, making it harder for them to assert themselves and pursue leadership roles. And it's this important aspect of military service that underpinned the development of the Women's Military Peace Operations course, which is a collaborative training program between the Department of Peace Operations and UN Women, headquarters in New York, which was piloted here in Seoul last year. This course includes the standard UN training for staff officers or military observers, as well as a week-long module on leadership, empowerment and networking to empower women in their leadership roles. In military contexts, gender power structures and dynamics not only perpetuate gender inequality, but they also undermine the effectiveness, cohesion, and ethical standards of the armed forces. So challenging these manifestations is essential for creating an environment where all personnel, regardless of gender, can contribute fully and equally to the mission. Let me share some examples of how gendered power structures and dynamics affect women in armed forces and peace operations. There is a strong protection ethos amongst senior male leaders in mission that prevents women peacekeepers from leaving base and thus interferes with their capacity to carry out their duties equally with their male colleagues. Uniformed women are still required to use personal protective equipment that is designed for standard masculine body types, which is not suitable for them to use safely. There is often unequal accommodations for sleeping or bathing on base, or they're difficult to access, which impacts women's safety moving between the accommodations. There are high rates of sexual assault and harassment faced by women in the military and in peace operations, and many armed forces still do not have policies in place to prevent and respond to these issues. Women peacekeepers are often perceived as women first, soldiers second. This can lead to the siloing of women into softer, safer roles, such as community engagement, rather than in their primary role. And finally, there's a perception that women bring their gender to military contexts, which undermines their professional identity as a military officer, and they're often treated with disrespect regardless of rank. Now, there are too many more examples to share here today, but I think these few demonstrate the pervasive influence of gendered dynamics in military operations and in the treatment of uniformed women. These ongoing dynamics are leadership failures. In the words of a male colleague of mine, they are a violation of a woman's right to deploy, not a reason to avoid deploying women. These examples show why gender mainstreaming as a strategy to counter the effects of these gendered power structures and dynamics is needed in the context of peace operations and armed forces. Gender mainstreaming integrates gender considerations into all policies, programs and operations to ensure equal benefits for women and men. It promotes equal recruitment, training and advancement opportunities while also addressing gender-specific challenges. Now, I emphasise that gender mainstreaming must go beyond the tokenistic representation of women, especially in terms of just increasing the numbers. It must strive for substantive equality where women's leadership, skills and perspectives are valued and utilised to shape more effective and inclusive security outcomes. And I would like to be clear here that gender mainstreaming is not about fixing women, but rather about the institutional and organisational culture shift needed to accept the diversity that women bring. That is, how can military institutions value women's leadership styles and strengths in all contexts, at home and on operations. Now, historically, military institutions, of course, have been traditionally male-dominated, with women largely excluded from formal combat and leadership positions. Despite this exclusion, women have contributed to military efforts throughout history, often in support roles. During times of war, women served as nurses, medics, spies, and in logistics and communications. Now, while critical to the war effort, these roles were typically viewed as peripheral and not recognised in the same way as combat duties. By the late 20th century, societal shifts and the growing need for military personnel led many nations to gradually increase the formal integration of women into the armed forces. However, women often faced significant resistance as traditional military cultures viewed their presence as disruptive to the institution's masculine identity. Many countries have maintained policies barring women from direct combat roles based on arguments related to physical capabilities, unit cohesion, and the perception that women need protection. And this has further restricted women's opportunities for promotion to senior ranks, where combat experience is often a prerequisite for leadership positions. In recent decades, many military institutions have recognised the capabilities and contributions of women, leading to significant policy changes. From the 1990s, countries such as Canada, Norway and Australia began to open combat and combat-related roles to women. In 2013, the United States formally lifted the ban on women serving in combat roles, following the acknowledgement that women were already engaging in combat situations in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And the British military officially removed all restrictions on women serving in any combat role in 2020. I also note the Republic of Korea's 2021 National Defence White Paper references the need to increase the female military workforce and pursue policies to open previously restricted specialties such as artillery, air defence and intelligence to women. So it has been slow progress globally to remove these restrictions, and it hasn't been easy. As I mentioned previously, I served as one of the senior officers of an Australian warship, Her Majesty's Australian ship Swan, in the mid-1990s, and this was due to the Australian government lifting the gender restrictions on combat-related roles. I was the senior logistics officer, and even though I hadn't previously served at sea as a junior officer, I had completed the same training and attained similar experience in shore roles to my male colleagues. This is me with the other officers. I don't know if you can see very clearly, I'm to the right of the gentleman in the middle, in the back row, one woman in the officers' mess of all men. And I was only one of 2 women in a crew of 212. And now this was, 28 years ago, but unfortunately it's still a common occurrence today to see women in such a minority. So being one of a minority was very difficult. It was very isolating. I faced gender-based attitudes, comments, and even violence from men merely because I was a woman in a job that they felt belonged to men. And of course, it was a new experience, a different experience for everyone, and it really challenged the gendered norms of the time. And they said women couldn't do it. They said we were not capable, but we did, and we didn't fail. And it's really from these humble beginnings that women, like New Zealand's Commander Grey, Chief of Army, and Defence Minister, have sprung. And it's from these humble beginnings that gender equality for uniformed women began. Now, these changes have been largely driven by certain factors, not the least global advocacy, commitments and legislation on gender equality, which provide for the equal right of uniformed women to serve alongside men. But as a central factor for militaries, the evolving and gendered nature of modern conflicts and warfare, where women are disproportionately affected, as Tyson pointed out, necessitates the need for more diverse forces to be deployed to peace operations to address the diverse security needs and concerns of the civilian populations. Traditional military strategies based on large-scale state-on-state warfare are increasingly being replaced by asymmetric warfare, including insurgencies, terrorism, cyber warfare, and hybrid threats. And they often take place in urban environments with civilian populations, where winning the hearts and minds is as important as military victory. Today's armed forces are involved in a variety of roles beyond combat, including humanitarian aid, disaster relief, peace building, and stability operations. And these conflicts and responses demand different leadership approaches and different skill sets, such as strategic thinking, risk assessment, and technological expertise, areas where women leaders in society more broadly are contributing significantly. And this leads me to share with you where gender mainstreaming has been effectively implemented. The Swedish Armed Forces actively recruit and retain women through targeted measures. Gender equality is embedded in leadership development, and all personnel receive training on gender dynamics and discrimination. The Canadian Armed Forces implemented gender analysis as a policy to assess how policies and programs affect individuals differently based on gender and other identity factors. And the Australian Defence Force have included initiatives to increase women's representation across all roles, enhance career and leadership development, implement targeted recruitment, and addressing sexual misconduct. As we move forward, I urge each of you to take concrete steps within your respective organisations and institutions to challenge the gender power structures and dynamics and promote gender mainstreaming. Embrace the principles of gender equality and inclusion, and commit to creating environments where everyone is respected, valued, and empowered to contribute their best. So to do this requires an institutional shift in culture, behaviours, and values. Don't just add women and stir, as Tyson also mentioned previously, and hope that it all works out. But to do this will allow women to advance in the security sector on the same basis as men, to demonstrate their competencies and skills on the same basis as men, and to achieve their full potential on the same basis as men. I would not have had my journey, albeit challenging at various times, as you can imagine, without these progressive and positive changes. Your leadership and actions are crucial in driving meaningful change, but together we can build stronger, more adaptive institutions that reflect the diverse world that we serve and uphold the highest standards of respect and professionalism, and these includes the standards expected of our peacekeepers. So let us take these lessons to heart and act decisively to create a future where gender equality is not just an aspiration, but a reality. Thank you.